All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, welcome. This is Bonnie McFarland. Welcome to our October State and Federal Directors Meeting. As you know, we postponed the meeting from our regular scheduled meeting last week because of the great shakeout. We always seem to have our meetings conflicting with that, so we moved it to today. So sorry for any inconvenience, but we knew all of you would be busy with that. So welcome today. We do, as I mentioned earlier, in the chat, you will find a link to the PowerPoint presentation, and you can access that, and we'll be posting the recording subsequent to the meeting. All our coordinators are with us today: Adrienne Balcazar, Debbie Cano, Rachel Garcia, and Jeannie Keith, and you'll be hearing from all of them today. So, and just a reminder, we won't in November with the holidays. We skip November. Our next meeting will be December 9th. So just a reminder on that. All right, let's move and take a look at topics for today. Of course, number one on the list is the next plan that's coming up in your life, and that's the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant. So there is some updated information we wanted to provide you and some resources that we have to support your work on that. Then we wanted to just give you an update on free reduced meal data collection. We're just going to give you a taste of that and follow up with some more detail in the future, but just wanted to put some things on your radar. With the FPM update today, we're going to focus on the Federal Stimulus Monitoring Program, which is the program that monitors the SR3 funds. And since you are in the midst of submitting those right now, we wanted to make sure that you knew the implications for program compliance for those funds. Then just an update on some reminders about mid-year monitoring, some things that should be happening so you don't hit that mid-year slump where things don't get done that come back and hit you later. So Debbie will provide us an update there. Then we'll be looking at the LCAP template and kind of a preview of the some of the possible changes that are coming, and that's going to the state board next week. And in addition to that, the supplement that's required in February. So both of those will be at the state board next week. So we're a little ahead of it, but we'll give you a preview of what is going to the board. And then a few reminders of some things that we just want you to know in your busy life, what's coming ahead. All right, so as usual, please put your questions in the chat. And we know that you ask some of our topics today are kind of detailed, and we know that you ask really challenging questions sometimes, so we will be getting back to you. We'll be sending you a Q&A with all the answers to all your questions. So please put those in the chat. And let's see, I think the next one is just a link to our previous meetings. So if you miss any meetings, we always have them posted. The materials are posted, the recordings are posted, the slides are posted. So they're all available for you on this link. And today's is also already there. All right, so let's jump in, and the first topic is the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant, and Rachel Garcia is going to provide an update, some new information that's been posted, and also some resources that we've developed for you. Rachel?
Thank you, Bonnie. Good morning, everyone. So at our last meeting, Bonnie provided an overview of the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant requirements, as well as the allowable uses of the funds. And so as Bonnie mentioned today, we just wanted to share some reminders and also some resources that we've developed to support your work in this area. Next slide, please. As a condition of receiving Educator Effectiveness funds, on or before December 30th, 2021, LEAs are required to develop and adopt a plan delineating how the Educator Effectiveness funds will be spent, including the professional development of teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, and classified staff. And the plan must be explained in a public meeting of the governing board before its adoption in a subsequent public meeting. So basically, 2 board meetings are required, one to present the plan and then one to adopt the plan. There is nothing in statute that requires a specific template to be used or developed by the CDE. So this is a local decision, And later on in the presentation, we will be sharing some sample templates that LEAs may use. But again, these are optional and LEAs may also develop their own template. Another important planning consideration is that Education Code 41480 specifies that LEAs shall coordinate the use of Title II funds with the expenditure of educator effectiveness funds, and the funds must be expended pursuant to the 10 allowable uses. Additionally, LEAs are encouraged to allow school site staff and content staff to identify the topics of professional learning. So another consideration is you'll want to consider what opportunities will be provided to get input from school site and content staff. Next slide. Educator effectiveness funds are allocated based on an equal amount per certificated and classified full-time equivalent as reported through CalPADS and CBEDS for the 2020-21 fiscal year. The CDE plans to release 80% of the allocation for each LEA in mid to late fall, with the remaining funds scheduled to be released in the spring of 2022. Now, funds may be expended during the 21-22, 22-23, 23-24, 24-25, and the 25-26 fiscal years. And LEAs are not required to expend any specific amount or percentage in any particular year. It's up to the LEA to make this determination as long as funds are expended by the deadline of June 30th, 2026. And any funds not expended by this date must be returned to the CDE. And one other important thing to note is that these funds are also subject to the annual audit process. Next slide. As a condition of receiving funds, LEAs must submit an annual data report and an annual expenditure report detailing information to the CDE, including but not limited to specific purchases made, as well as the number of teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, or classified staff that received professional development. And these reports must be submitted on or before September 30th of each year. A final data and expenditure report is also required to be submitted to the CDE on or before September 30th, 2026. The CDE will be posting templates of these reports, indicating the specific data elements required to be completed. However, submission of the reports will be completed through an online application. Next slide, please. So here is a timeline that basically just summarizes all of the information that was just shared. So currently you can see LEAs should be developing their plan and collecting feedback. The next step would be to present the plan at a public meeting of the governing board and then adopt the plan in a subsequent meeting on or before December 30th, 2021. LEAs should then implement and monitor the plan through 2026, ensuring to submit the required annual data and expenditure reports on or before September 30th of each year. And lastly, all funds must be used by June 30th, 2026, with the final expenditure report completed on or before September 30th, 2026. Next slide, please. So as a resource, the CDE has posted frequently asked questions on their educator effectiveness webpage. And here we've included 2 FAQs related specifically to the plan. And so the first question, does a recipient of funds have to submit its local plan for educator effectiveness to the California Department of Education? And so the answer to this question is no. The plan does not need to be submitted to the CDE or to the County Office of Education. As previously mentioned, it just needs to be presented to the local governing board at a public meeting and then adopted at a subsequent public meeting on or before December 30th. The second question, is a template available for the plan LEAs are required to develop and adopt, delineating how the educator effectiveness funds will be spent? And so again, the answer there is no. And the CDE has stated that LEAs should develop its own plan and that they will not be providing a template for the plan. However, we do have some samples that we've developed as a resource for LEAs, and we'll be sharing those. Next slide, please. So here is the first sample template. And so this template was created and graciously shared by our colleagues at the Riverside County Office of Education. And so a few highlights of this template are that it includes a section for each of the 10 allowable uses. And it also allows LEAs to include planned expenditures according to the year in which the LEA plans to use the funds. So it includes multiple years. Next slide, please. So this next template we developed for LEAs that might want to include total budgeted amounts rather than multi-year expenditures. And we also included a section for LEAs to describe how the funds are being coordinated with Title II funds, as well as a section for LEAs to describe how school site and content staff were allowed to identify the topics of professional development. This template also includes a section for each of the 10 allowable uses, like the previous sample template. Next slide, please. And so we've also developed a third sample template. And like the previous template, this sample template that we've developed also includes a section for LEAs to describe how funds are being coordinated with Title II funds. And also a section for LEAs to describe how school site and content staff were allowed to identify the topics of professional development. This template is not broken down by allowable use sections like the two previous samples. However, it includes a column for LEAs to indicate the specific allowable use number. And again, these sample templates were developed as a resource for LEAs and are completely optional. LEAs can choose to use one of these templates, create your own template, or even adapt one of the samples that we've provided to meet the requirements and your specific LEA needs. Next slide, please. As an additional resource for LEAs, we put together a sample executive summary for the Educator Effectiveness Plan. And so here you can see a screenshot of the document. And all of the sample templates shared, as well as this executive summary, are posted on our LEGO webpage. And again, feel free to adapt any of these documents as needed. Next slide. And lastly, here are some CDE resources related to the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant. We've included the links to the funding results webpage where you can find your specific allocation amount, and also links to program information, the FAQs, and the reporting requirements. And so that concludes my section. So now I will turn it back over to Bonnie.
Okay, Rachel, just before we lose you, just to clarify, there is no submission. This is totally a locally developed and approved plan, no submission to the county office or CDE. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, very good. That address. We can pick off one easy question. The rest are tougher. Okay. All right. Then we just wanted to touch on the next topic, and that is just to give you an update on the current status of free and reduced price meal data collection and how it impacts your work. And again, we're just scratching the surface today, and we've invited our expert on this, Mary Sham, to join us at our next meeting. Depending on the questions that you have, we anticipate you may have more in-depth questions that she can address, but we just wanted to put on your radar this month. If you've been working with state and federal programs for a while, this will be familiar to you. But if you're new, we want to make sure that you get an overview about where we are on this and how and where we got to this place and the implications for your work, because there's been a lot of movement on this in the last few years. So let's take a look at the next slide and just a little background on free and reduced price meal. The free and reduced price meal program is operated from the Department of Agriculture, so that's the first thing to be aware of. And it was originally established to provide free or reduced meals to eligible low-income students. To implement the program, districts and schools were required to collect forms to determine which students are eligible for the services. The form used for this is the National School Lunch Program application, and it must be administered under certain requirements. So there are requirements surrounding the use of the form, and that creates some challenges we'll take a look at in a minute. Again, the program's operated through the Department of Agriculture, and you'll find it's operated through your school nutrition services. So there has always been a challenge, depending on the relationship in the district between food services and your program people. That's always been an issue of trying to work that out so you can coordinate what information you need from that data. In an effort to reduce the paperwork for burden on collecting these applications, throughout the years there have been some changes. So new provisions were implemented, and the first were there are 3 provisions that you may have heard of: provision 1, 2, and 3 schools. And these were provisions that were put in place to reduce that burden, and essentially they reduced the number of times that districts had to, or LEAs had to, collect that data. Then in 2010, a new provision was added, and that's the Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP, which you might hear of. And CEP was added, and it eliminated the application process completely by using directly certified data. So you can see we have multiple kinds of programs going on. And we'll take a look at how they impact you. Next slide, let's look just briefly at provision 1, 2, and 3. Mostly you hear about provision 2 and 3 programs, but they're a little bit different, each of them, and we're not going to detail because you could go way into the weeds on this. There's a lot of detail on these programs if you're operating them, and your food services people will be able to support you with that. But we just wanted to give you an overview and let you know, because provision 2 and 3 you hear of more because they allow for less frequent collection of application forms. Both require the forms be collected once every 4 years, where you can see provision 1 is for a 2-year period. And provision 1 also requires an 80% poverty rate. So a little more restrictive. Provision 2 and 3 have that 4-year, and the difference in the two are the reimbursement process. Okay. All right, next slide is we'll take a look at additional. So the Community Eligibility Program, which is the newest one, again, was an effort to get food services to more students and in a more efficient manner. I'm sorry. So in 2010, this was added as another option, and to provide meals to all students based on directly certified students on a 4-year basis. So you use those students who are directly certified, and then there's a formula to establish that, because you know when you have your directly certified students often don't reflect your total low-income population. So CEP provides a formula, and it's only available to schools with 40% low-income students or above. Collection of the National School Lunch Program forms is prohibited if you operate a CEP program. So you can start to see some of the challenges there if you use those forms for other purposes. All right. As with the other provision options, there's a lot of detail to CEP, but we just want you to, again, to be aware that this is an option and it impacts the collection and verification of data for low-income students. All right, next slide. So the Department of Agriculture also operates summer meal programs, and the summer meal programs allow schools to provide meals during the summer months without any requirement for collecting a national lunch program applications. As a result of the pandemic, there was a need for more children to receive nutrition services. So in 2020, the USDA allowed schools to operate under the summer meal program during the school year for the 2021 school year, and then that was extended for the 21-22 school year. You can find more information about that on the link, and there are numerous documents that give you a lot of information on those programs. But this summer meal program extended, so there was no collection required. All right, next we have the state now stepped in. So let's look at the state programs. All right. There's also been some action that's going to impact nutrition services, and that's going forward. It's not started yet, but it needs to be on your radar. On July 9th this year, Governor Newsom signed Assembly Bill 130 into law and included our changes to the state mandate and requirements to applying for the CEP or Provision 2 schools. The legislation doesn't take effect until 22-23, but it's going to require schools to provide breakfast and lunch to any student who requests it free of charge. In return, the state will then provide supplemental funding to cover the difference from what the federal program reimburses the district. So they're making up that difference. But all schools need to participate, and all LEAs with at least 40% low-income students will be required to participate in one of the programs we previously discussed, either Provision 2 or Community Eligibility programs. So while all of these options taken together, they do address the goal of reducing paperwork for food services and expanding nutrition services for students, but they do create some challenges in other areas. Because the information is not collected annually, the counts don't reflect new students or previously not identified students. And we know with the pandemic, there have been a lot of students who were not previously identified as low income who now would fit that category. So how does that affect you? On the next slide, we'll take a look. It affects you in a few ways. One is funding. So in California, national school lunch applications were used to identify students as low income so they could be included in the unduplicated pupil count used to determine your supplemental and concentration grant funding under LCFF. So the free and reduced price meal that taken from CalPADS is what's used for your LCFF funding. So that's one way that this data is important to you. The second is your Title I school ranking. So when you get your consolidated application in the winter submission, your CONAP will include CalPADS data for students age 5 through 17, and that's used for you to report Title I eligibility, so what schools are eligible, and to rank those schools. So it could impact your ranking. Okay? The third way it impacts you, and this is a new one, is the eligibility for the Pandemic Electronic Eligibility Transfer, which everyone calls, we can see here why, PEBT, and that provides food services for families. So those are some ways in which this plays out, and it plays out in a number of ways. But all of this is based on your Fall 1 CalPADS submission, which is going to be certified which is going to be submitted at the end of this month. All right, next slide. All right. So this early on, and when LCFF came into effect, CDE already addressed the issues relative to LCFF funding because they saw the problems right away. So they responded to concerns about identification of low-income students for LCFF supplemental and concentration funds by developing extensive response in their FAQs on the LCFF webpage. So if you go to that link, you'll find a significant amount of information on that link that goes in depth about how to collect that data, and it also includes responses specifically related to provision schools and CEP schools and how that works. In addition, they develop what they call an alternative household income form for use in the intervening years. So in between those years when you're not have a base year and you're not collecting the data, they developed an alternative form that doesn't have the restrictions on it that the National School Lunch Program form has. It was needed because of the restrictions. For example, the National School Lunch Program form cannot be used in various schools that are in some of the provision in CEP. It's essentially prohibited, so you have to use a separate form. All right, so next slide. For LCFF, supplemental and concentration funding, some of the ways that free and reduced meal data is going to be based on one of the following from CalPADS. So it's your October 31st submission, and that can be through an alternative household income form, a national school lunch application, or a local direct certification match, or a direct certification match in one of the CalPADS monthly matches. So CalPADS they pick up direct certification for various students, and those are all part of what's included in the LCFF unduplicated count. In addition, any student identified as migrant, homeless, or tribal foster youth, also who's identified that way in your CalPADS, would also be included in that count. So those are students who are included. So what you need to consider are what students might be missed. Okay. All right. So what are the consequences? Well, if you have an undercounting, so this is why we wanted to put on your radar. First of all, and the one that gets most people's attention, is number one, and that you would have a reduction in your LCFF supplemental and concentration grant. So any students not included that would have been eligible are dollars that are not going to the district or the charter school. So that's the first and number one impact. The other has to do with your Title I identified schools. So CalPADS prior year free and reduced meal data is used on that Title I school allocations page in the CON-app. So schools that are identified as below the district poverty average or below the 35% minimum, they would show up as not eligible for Title I funds. So it could affect your ranking order, and usually that's not as much of an issue, but it could be if you have limited funds and you have a school that falls out. But you could have a school that falls out of ranking that was previously funded if by chance that school had a low percentage rate of returns on their applications. For charter schools and county offices of education, there are a couple ways it would impact them. It could actually result in a reduction in funding in two programs, in Title I and Title IV. For school districts, federal census poverty data is used for your ESSA determination. So anything that uses poverty data, that would be for most school districts, that's based on federal census poverty data. So the applications wouldn't affect you. But because charter schools don't have geographic boundaries, then they don't have a census poverty count. So CDE uses CalPADS free and reduced price meal data for Title I funding determinations. It also has implications for Title IV because Title IV is based on a proportionate share of your Title I funds. And actually Title II would be impacted too because the formula for Title II includes a low income count. So all of these pieces could impact particularly charter schools and county offices to a greater degree even than it would school districts. All right. So what do you need to do? Well, I think because there are different rules and restrictions governing the National School Lunch Program and the alternative income forms, and because of those upcoming changes in 22-23 that are going to require all schools to provide food services to all students free of charge that ask for it, those discussions need to be taking place between program office and your food services staff. Actually, food services staff, I learned this from our resident expert, they are not allowed to collect the alternative income forms because that's not allowed under condition of the program. So that could be slipping below the between the cracks if you're not having those conversations. So there needs to be a discussion to say, are we missing any students? How are we making sure we catch all these kids given the new requirements? So we invited Miriam Shanga, our Nutrition and Wellness Coordinator here at LECO, to the December meeting to answer any questions, because we anticipate we're going to see questions in the chat that go way beyond what maybe we can address. But in the meantime, you can definitely contact her. We put her contact information here, and she really understands the ins and outs of the school lunch program. But we just wanted to address it in terms of how this can impact either your title programs or your LCFF funding pieces. So let us know if you'd like more on this next month, and Miriam has offered to join us. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne, who's going to update us on the FPM. Adrienne?
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here with all of you. Today, the Federal Program Monitoring Update will begin with a few reminders, and then, as Bonnie and Rachel mentioned earlier, we will take a closer look at the Federal Stimulus Monitoring Instrument in relation to SR3. So CDE has an update for the 2021 FPM reviews. Nothing will change for Cycle B's online reviews. They will remain online for the entire school year. However, the on-site reviews for November and December have now been switched from an on-site review to a telemonitoring review. So Cycle D on-site reviews for September through December of 2021 will be conducted as a telemonitoring review. And if the future 2022 FPM reviews change, then CDE will continue to notify those districts of the FPM format changes. And as for your convenience, we also are including the green table again, which explains the different FPM formats. CDE will be hosting a mid-year virtual FPM training in December and January. They did give these tentative dates of the 6th through the 7th in both months. We will keep you posted when CDE releases more information about this training. But as always, everyone can access the past FPM training material and resources from the August FPM training. And so I invite everyone, whether you're reviewed or not, to go to this CDE's box. The link at the bottom of this slide will take you directly to that FPM folder for the 21-22 school year. And again, this is where the latest information, the latest instruments, it's kind of your one-stop shop, and it's a really great resource. So now let's take a closer look at the Federal Stimulus Monitoring Program Instrument. This instrument will collect the required evidence that ensures that the LEA's compliance in maintaining the written records about how the funds were received, dispersed, and spent. And so although the items in this instrument cover Year 1 and 2 and SR1 and SR2, today we're going to look specifically at SR3. And so just so that you know, originally this instrument was entitled CARES Act and ARP back in June. Then in August, they revised it and posted an updated one, and they changed the title. So the Federal Stimulus Monitoring Program Instrument is what it's called. And just so you know, the actual item numbers maintained the CA, which is CARES Act. It maintained that title in the numbering of the items. So sometimes it's a little confusing because they don't use FSM, they use the CA, which is the CARES Act, which was the original title of the instrument. So I just want to put that out there first in case you get confused. So many of you have submitted or will be submitting your board adopted SR3 plan. And so we wanted to make sure that before you, if you haven't turned it in, or if you already did, we want to make sure that you understand that the FPM requirements are part of this process. And so you just want to affirm that the process you have in place and the written documentation is and would be the correct evidence that is being asked in the Federal Stimulus Monitoring Program instrument. The instrument was revised, as said, and so again, here we're going to look at CA11. CA11 focuses on the ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funds. However, so 11.1 is specifically looking and focusing on the allowable activities using ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funding. And then the rest of this particular item, 11.2 through 11.5, all focus on the requirements of ESSER 3. So starting with ESSER 2, ESSER 2 focuses on the allowable activities using the ESSER 3 funding. So any related evidence that is would be asked in relation to the authorized activities would be required. 11.3 addresses the requirements on how the ESSER 3 funds are being spent. So the LEA must develop and make publicly available a plan on how the LEA is going to use the ESSER 3 funds. And there must be evidence that the community was engaged in meaningful consultation and that the public was also given an opportunity to provide input in the development of this plan. 11.4 specifically addresses the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services component of ESSER 3. And so this plan must be developed and submitted no later than 30 days after receiving the allocation of ESSER 3 funds. And there must be public comment on the plan, and the plan must be updated every 6 months in regards to checking with CDC health requirements. And so because the June letter came out that explained that within 30 days of signing the assurances, there might be some confusion, but rest assured, the FPM instrument is asking for this plan within 30 days of receiving the allocation. So because you already submitted it 30 days after signing the assurances, it's a moot point. You're already in alignment with that because you've already submitted and they created this plan. So I hope that made sense. If not, you can put a question in the chat and we'll address it again. Now, 11.5 is about and focuses on the SR3 expenditure plan. So there are some requirements. And in addition to the template and in the instructions, the ESSER plan must include minimally 20% of the ESSER3 funding to be used to address the learning loss of students. The LEA must implement evidence-based interventions, making sure that these interventions are addressing the students' academic, social, and emotional needs. In addition to this, the instrument requirement, as well as the ESSA requirement, is that it must address the impact of the COVID-19 on the low-income students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care. So given the different components that I just pointed out, here are the requested evidence that must be submitted to CDE during an FPM review. You must upload the general ledger, the federal stimulus invoices, the position control report, payroll records, duty statements, time and effort records, safe return to in-person instruction plan, and your ESSER3 LEA expenditure plan, as well as learning loss evidence-based interventions. And you'll notice here that some of these evidence say secondary evidence requests for CARES Act. And basically what this is saying is that the FPM reviewer would take a look, say for example, at the bottom of this slide for the ESSER3 LEA expenditure plan, and in the component of the learning loss and having evidence-based interventions, the FPM reviewer would randomly select a particular intervention and ask for that specific backup documentation on how it was determined that that intervention truly is evidence-based and perhaps what tier level it was. And so again, these secondary evidence requests just kind of put you on the alert that there's kind of levels. So level 1 is the actual invoice or the statements or records, and then the FPM reviewer will ask for more specific backup documentation. So again, making sure that you have the written records and everything, you know, memorializing the process and the correct usage of the funds. So I also wanted to remind you that in the back of this particular instrument, Appendix A, it also provides all of the allowable uses of the ESSER funds. I believe there's 20, so 1 through 20, so it's quite lengthy, but it's definitely something to follow. And so also I wanted to leave you with some ESSER plan reminders. So we know with the consultation and in the instructions, it does state that there must be some form of communication with or outreach to the tribe, civil rights organizations, advocates, and your community partners and the public at large. So my question to you is, how did you address the consultation of these particular organizations or groups? And does your plan provide a clear description on how you engaged all the stakeholders in the development of your SR3 plan? Again, you know, talking about SR3 funds and all of the requirements and involving the public and involving all of your community members, making sure that your consultation is truly gathering the input of everyone. And, you know, how did you provide the opportunity for public input? So again, these are some things that, you know, need to be clearly described in your consultation aspect of the SR3 plan. And then what about learning loss actions? Are they related to addressing the academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs of your most vulnerable students, as well as the opportunity gaps that existed before and were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic? So again, keeping the focus on the intent of SR3 funds. And also, what about your evidence-based interventions? Do you know if the evidence was produced through formal studies and research? Do you know what tier the evidence-based intervention would fall into, tier 1, 2, tier 3, or tier 4? So again, these are some reminders as you're developing the SR3, or, you know, as you turned it in. If you didn't, you might be hearing from us in LA County regarding your SR3 plan. So in closing, just wondering, do you know who's involved in the development of your safe return to in-person instruction plan? And are people aware about how to be involved in the development of the SR3 plan? So, you know, it's not a process where it's done in isolation. You really can't do this alone. And, you know, it is posted on your website and such, so that there is access for the public to know what's happening. So again, just wanted to keep everyone up to date on the latest that's on your plate right now. And so now Debbie is going to go over mid-year monitoring.
Thanks, Adrienne. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be going over just a few reminders, good things to keep in mind at this point in the year. Next slide, please. So we do know that many of you use our state and federal monthly checklists for LEAs and school sites, but for those of you who are new, if you don't know what that is, you may want to contact our office and or one of us to talk about that and see if that's something that would be helpful to you. I know when I was at a school site or at a district, that was really very helpful to me in supporting my LEA. Okay, so first of all, we want to make sure that you know that For CBEDs, the information that you collected on October 6th, that you want to verify that that information is submitted by tomorrow through the CBEDs online reporting system. That may not be something that you do, somebody else does, but you just want to make sure that you verify that that has been completed and submitted. Very important data. Next, we want to verify that the Title I targeted assistance schools, that the students have been identified for services and that they're identified based on your LEA's multiple educationally related objective criteria. So that we have a list of these students, and that each school should have a list, and then maintaining the list of these students who are receiving Title I services. So you have Title I schools that are targeted assistance. This is critical and crucial that you want to verify that each of these school leaders have these lists based on that objective criteria. And next, you want to verify students' ELAS. So the English language acquisition status are correctly reported in CalPADS. So any student that had a TBD or to be determined in their ELAS column or on their student identification, you want to make sure that that has been changed to whatever their results were from their initial LPAC or from the data that you received from another school, and that is correctly reported in your Fall 1 amendment. So you have until December 17th to clean up any data, so to ensure that the English learner students are correctly identified. So you want to check in with whomever does your CalPADS reporting and make sure that you review those lists and make sure the data is correct. Next slide, please. So this one is to identify school sites that meet the 15% threshold for requiring communication in a primary language. So this includes all notices, reports, statements, and records, and any communication to these families need to be in their primary language for any of the school sites that meet this 15% threshold. And it is easy to find through DataQuest. Every year you can just go there, and the report is very easily pulled. And if you need any help with that, of course, you can also call us and we will help you with that. But if you find that you are, most of your schools are, then maybe developing a system, my recommendation would be to develop a system through your LEA to support the schools rather than them doing their translations separately for those type of documents that go out to all students. And then next, to ensure all English learners are receiving daily ELD instruction. So now students are solidly in their classes, and so you want to pull data to ensure that students are receiving that daily designated ELD and from an appropriately credentialed teacher. So we want to make sure that all of our students, this is elementary and secondary, are receiving designated ELD. Being in an integrated ELD class in secondary, it doesn't suffice. So you really want to make sure that you're pulling your enrollment and cross-checking that data at this point in the year. And then lastly, you want to, even though it feels like we just submitted our LCAPs, we always have to keep in mind that, you know, this is an ongoing thing. This is not something that I is ever really finished. So really developing a timeline for consultation with those required groups for that annual update of the 21-22 LCAP, and then the development of the 22-23 LCAP. So really developing that timeline now, because scheduling later on in the school year, it just becomes very difficult to pick days and times that work for everyone. So we want you to make sure that you keep that in mind and plan that now, because it will be upon you sooner than you know it. And Then I'll leave you with the quote. Remember, action today can prevent a crisis tomorrow. I like that one. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back over, oh no, to Jeannie, correct?
Yes, thank you, Debbie. Perfect segue into the LCAP update. So if we could go to the next slide. So as you know, Senate Bill 98 and Assembly Bill 130 amended Ed Code sections to require specific revisions to the Local Control and Accountability Plan and the annual update template and instructions. And additionally, Section 124 of AB 130 requires the State Board of Education to adopt a one-time supplement template to the annual update to the 2021-22 LCAP. And they're required to adopt this on or before November 30th, 2021. So to address these requirements, following the September 2021 meeting of the State Board, the California Department of Education revised the initial draft templates and instructions and solicited additional input from the LCAP advisory group and educational partners throughout the state. So today's update addresses the proposed revisions required by SB 98 and AB 130, and it provides CDE's recommendation to replace the term stakeholder with educational partners throughout these documents, and also provides some of the proposed revisions to address the required 2021-22 supplement template and related instructions. So today is just a highlight of the proposed revisions, which includes the consistent use of educational partners in place of stakeholders throughout these final draft templates. It includes the inclusion of the additional concentration grant funding required in AB 130. And this is addressed in the one-time supplement and in the increased or improved services section for next year's LCAP. And it also includes the requirement to calculate carryover LCFF funding. And this is addressed in the proposed revisions in the increased or improved services section and in the LCFF carryover table. So if you go to the next slide, please. So at next week's State Board meeting, the CDE will present proposed revisions to the LCAP template and the one-time supplement. The attachments included on the slide are from the board item, and these provide feedback from stakeholders, current templates, initial revisions, and final draft revisions being taken for action at the November 3rd meeting. The proposed final draft revisions are included in attachment 5 and 6 and include changes to the template sections, action tables, and related instructions. We will take a look at just a few of the key proposed changes in the final draft for the LCAP template and the related instructions, and in the final draft for the one-time supplement to the annual update to the 2021-22 LCAP. Next slide, please. So here in looking at the goal analysis, the proposed revision for the goal analysis, which is reflecting on the 21-22 LCAP, includes the planned percentages of improved services and the estimated actual percentages of improved services. Additionally, the goal analysis connects to the annual update table and the estimated actual percentages of improved services for last year's actions, which are also included in the Contributing Actions Annual Update table. Okay, so these planned percentages of improved services is an additional component which is included in this revision. Next slide, please. CDE is proposing revisions to address the requirement to calculate carryover and the requirement to include additional concentration grant funds to increase staffing providing direct services to students at high concentration school sites in the increased or improved services section. At the top of this slide, you can see the proposed inclusion of the concentration grant add-on funding. On the second row, proposed are the projected percentages reflecting LCFF supplemental and concentration grant amounts for the coming school year, and a percentage reflecting the proportional increase of LCFF carryover funds, and a total percentage for the LEA to increase or improve services for the coming school year. This section references and connects to the budgeted expenditures for contributing actions and specific instructions for calculations that are included for the Contributing Actions Annual Update table and the Contributing Actions table. CDE indicated that feedback from statewide educational partners indicated a need for greater clarity within the instructions related to how LEAs might calculate the required percentage of planned qualitative improvements. They indicated a desire for calculations being performed within the action tables to be provided within the instructions and clarification related to the carryover requirements. So this is their proposed revision addressing this feedback. Next slide, please. Additionally, the revision in the increased or improved section includes a table for LEAs to articulate staff to student ratios as applicable to the LEA. Here, the LEA would include how they are increasing the ratio of staff providing direct services to students at high concentration schools. The instructions for this prompt have also been revised to address instances where the amount of additional concentration grant add-on is not sufficient to provide additional staff. Instances where an LEA does not have comparison schools, and instructions as to the staff and students to be used in identifying the required staff to student ratios. Next slide, please. Additional revisions are proposed for the supplement to the annual update to the 2021-22 Local Control and Accountability Plan. And here the SBE board item indicates that feedback from statewide educational partners requested clarification related to the reporting requirements for the 21-22 supplement, as well as the meaning of the phrase funds provided through the Budget Act of 2021 that were not included in the LCAP. In response to this feedback, the CDE sought clarification as to the intent and meaning of the requirements for the 21-22 supplement. And in response, they have revised the instructions based upon this information that was received. The instructions also clarify the reporting requirement for LEAs and provide flexibility for LEAs to refer to other planning documents to reduce duplication of effort. You can see the additional information highlighted at the top of the proposed revision about the funding sources and requirements, as well as below as requirements for engagement included with the term educational partners. And you'll note that the engagement requirement applies to both the plans for the additional concentration grant add-on funds, as well as the SR3 plan development. Next slide, please. So this brings us to your process for engaging educational partners in two key components. The one-time supplement for the annual update to the 21-22 LCAP requires LEAs to engage their educational partners in planning for the use of additional concentration grant funds included in the Budget Act and one-time funding through SR3. As seen in the previous slide, LEAs will need to report how and when consultation occurred for each of these funding sources and the plan for implementation that was informed by meaningful consultation with educational partners. A question for your LEA is, what will your LEA's process include to ensure your educational partners have the necessary information to engage in decisions about the use of additional concentration funding? Additionally, the annual update process for the LCAP requires consultation with educational partners. So it is important to plan how your LEA will continue to engage educational partners in the goal analysis questions to reflect on the current year outcomes, implementation of actions, and estimated actuals for expenditures in this year's LCAP. In preparing to engage stakeholders, it is necessary to prepare what will be shared to provide context for their input. For example, how survey data will be collected and shared with educational partners. Who will oversee this process so it can inform educational partners about actions being implemented, needs and circumstances in the LEA? How will data about action implementation be shared so it is clear for educational partners to understand what has occurred, how much it costs, and what data can be shared to inform effectiveness? Each of these pieces, as you know, require coordination among those doing the work in the LEA to implement the action so that all is in place can be shared meaningfully with your educational partners and the board. Next slide, please. In closing, we wanted to share some training information that the CDE anticipates providing pending approval of the proposed revisions to the LCAP template and the one-time supplement. The CDE will begin providing training with specific training for the one-time supplement and the requirements for reporting to the governing board or body by February 28th. So Tuesday, November 9th will be the first of a series of trainings to address the proposed revisions. And on the next slide are listed the specific training CDE anticipates providing on Tuesdays and Thursdays, beginning November 9th. The training topics address introduction to LCFF and key components of the proposed revisions to the template. And at the bottom, a link is included for the training on required goals. And the CDE's Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division provided an October 21 information memorandum related to the identification of low-performing student groups and low-performing schools. In this memorandum, it includes the LEAs identified for consistently low-performing student groups and the schools identified as consistently low-performing schools. This includes 57 LEAs listed with the eligible student groups and 10 eligible schools listed with their district. And now I'm going to turn it back to Bonnie for some additional reminders.
Thanks, Jeannie. And just maybe one thing you can clarify is the approval, the template for the new LCAP is going to the state board in November, just next week. They may approve it then, but it's our understanding they have until January to approve it. Is that correct, Jeannie?
That is correct.
Okay, so we will see. It may change or it may go through. So stay tuned on that one. All right, we just wanted to just give you a few reminders and a preview of your life to come in the next couple months. So on the next slide, you can kind of see we tried to, I'm sure we've missed a lot of things that are in your life, but here are some key ones. And first of all, coming up, your SR3 Expenditure Plan, that's due the 29th to be board approved, and it's submitted to us within 5 days of approval. And just a reminder on the assurances and the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of instruction plan. Some LEAs have not completed that. That is a condition of funding, so you'd probably notice funding hasn't been flowing to you. We do we got a list from CDE of some LEAs that had not submitted it. We did find that you have subsequently done that. But bottom line, you can look on the funding page for the SR3 assurances, and there is a column for the SR3 funding, I'm sorry, and there's a column that indicates if they have it recorded that you have submitted the assurances and the plan. So you can look there, and if you haven't, you need to do that. You have until December 17th to do that. Or if you believe you have, you can check with CDE and make sure they have it recorded accurately. So just a reminder. Next coming up is what Rachel talked about, the Educator Effectiveness Plan, December 31st. And that does require public hearing and board approval by the December 30th. But there is no submission on that. That goes just, that's a local plan for you. And then you have reporting on it, but no submission to us or to CDE. And then some of the normal things you do every year, your SARC is still there, and that's including local data. This year, if you did not do, if you didn't do state testing, then you need to include local data in that. And if you have data questions, Evan Bartelheim, our assessment person, would be a good contact for you. Again, same due date as always, February 1st. Our understanding is the release has been delayed a bit on that, but the due date is still the same. There is board approval required on that and no submission except into the system. So it is submitted, but electronically. The consolidated application is due to be released still on January 15th and will be due on February 28th as usual. We'll be doing a workshop on that. There is no board approval required for that for the winter submission. You may take it to the board, but that's a local decision. You have to have it approved for the spring submission in June. You had to have it board approved, but you don't have to have it approved. And then that is submitted directly to CDE via the Consolidated Application Reporting System. Then February 28th also is your supplement to the annual update, and that's what Jeannie just talked about, and that's a presentation to your board because there's nothing for them to approve, and at that, then it's the annual update portion is submitted with your LCAP in June. So just a couple, just again, the reminders, thinking back to on your SR3 plan, since that's coming up. Adrian mentioned a number of things that are district or LEA responsibilities. We want you to keep that in mind. Sometimes, and we do try and let you know or alert you if we see something that's questionable, but not everything is that's in the plan or in the instructions is also part of the requirements. So there are requirements beyond what the instructions say. So sometimes we get pushback if we mention something and that, well, the instructions don't say that. Well, yes, but the compliance monitoring does, and we just want to let you know so that some things may not be part of our approval process. So don't count on that as everything is covered. For example, we asked a CDE about in terms of allowable costs, and they let us know that the actions in that plan do need to be in response to COVID, and they clearly stated it is a district responsibility or an LEA responsibility to document that, maintain documentation, and make the case that whatever that action is, we can't judge that, but that's on you. So that's one of the kinds of things that that are part of your responsibility. And I know sometimes it's easy to kind of zone out when we talk about FPM if it's not your FPM year, but remember, these are multi-year funds, and they can go back and look, and the actions you're taking now can be subject to FPM. So just want to remind you of a few of those things. So I think that with that, and looking at that list of to-dos, you probably won't mind having a few extra minutes to start on those things right now. We will be responding in our Q&A. Our next meeting is December 9th, and because of the Thanksgiving holiday, but we're here and we'll be responding to questions, and we will be reviewing. You might hear from us. We are also reviewing comprehensive, your CSI, Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools. We will be reviewing your prompts from the LCAP, okay, and we have to look specifically at those now, and we've been asked by CDE to review those and recommend them for approval to CDE. So if you may be hearing from us also regarding CSI schools. So I think that's enough for you for one morning. Thank you. Stay in touch with us. We'll be getting that Q&A out to you. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. They always push our thinking and improve all your colleagues. So take care and have a good day.